All right, this is all right, that'll do, I guess. All right. I'll give it a few more seconds. All right, we'll go with this many. All right, so what law protects movies and music? All right, the DMCA, Digital Millennium Copyright Act. All right, what law ensures financial disclosure? Graham-Leach, oh, Sarbanes-Oxley, pardon me. I thought it was Graham-Leach-Bliley, but Sarbanes-Oxley. All right. What's the new European law? Yep, General Data Protection Regulation, greatly feared. And what are the laws police enforce? Right, criminal law. All right, so let's see, the winners are Jesh, I hope that's something resembling real name. V is certainly not much of a name. And Wes, that might be a real name. All right, so, aha, this chat message might perhaps be someone telling me who they are. Let's see. Aha, okay, V, good, good. I will put in a little more of a name here then. Good, all right, so I now have enough of a name so my grader can presumably find you. Good, all right. And so let's go back to here and see what more we've got. So there's documentation of your security rules. There's various types. Your policy, by the way, there is a mission of your company, which is even above security, which is why you exist. Google's mission is to index all the world's information. You have a general statement like that. But then in the security world, you have a security policy, and that is your general overarching statement of what you're doing. We're going to protect the data of our customers. Then you have procedures, which are step-by-step what you have to do, and then a standard, which are particular products you've chosen to use. Like I was saying before this lecture, I was very pleased that the National Institute of Standards has now specified specific standards to protect you from ransomware. So now for the first time ever, I finally know what products to train students in. There are certain products they say, teach these products and then people will be protected. And I said, that's what I'd like, because I don't really know what to do when there's like 100 advertised products and I know most of them don't work. Then there's guidelines and baselines. Guidelines are recommended procedures, and then there's baselines, which are recommended policies for different things. Microsoft publishes baselines for a domain controller and a file server and a DNS server and so on, recommended benchmarks. So you got all of these structure components of your security policies. And so your overall security policy assigns responsibilities and requirements and acceptable risk levels. And this is what your senior management does to prove that they have exercised due care. And so you have policies at the top level, then you have levels of policies down here, and then categories of policies over there. So there's different parts of the company they might apply to, and there's different areas of activity that they might cover. So you got organizational policies and issue-specific policies like your email, and so on, and system-specific policies like firewalls. These are all over the place. Regulatory policies are just policies to comply with legal standards that come from the government or regulatory body. So you just have to read documents that come from the government and then have your team make sure that you are in compliance with those documents. Then you have advisory policies are just recommendations, and this is usually the case, and then informative policies. Then there are processes, which are step-by-step how to do something, how we do things. This is why most TV cop shows, they say, are police procedurals, where the cops have procedures. You show up, you put tape around, you interview the witnesses, you take pictures of everything. Those are procedures. And if you have good procedures, then they provide what you need to handle the trouble that might come up. So you have security procedures, step-by-step procedures telling you what to do for the particular products you're using. And then standards. These are compulsory requirements for things. These are courses of action to implement them. These are tactical documents and you usually have a certain standard antivirus in every machine, standard firewalls in every network segment, and so on. Then there are guidelines, which are recommendations that might be more flexible, and baselines, which are just measurements of normal activity on the network, normal settings of things, so you can detect deviations from them, and so you can bring things up to the recommended minimum configuration. All right, so I got another set of cahoots about that. All right, 1F is here, and there's 1F, ha. All right. All right, I'll give it a few more seconds. Ah, here comes some more. All right, I guess that's it. Okay. So, which policy enforces compliance with law? That's regulatory. Huh, I got the wrong answer there. That's rude. Sorry about that. Regulatory is certainly the right answer. I don't know why I had the wrong answer there. We will carry on. I do think these things are extra credit. Whoever wrote these things make mistakes. Anyway, so, all right. What's the most common type of policy? Advisory is the most common. Good. All right. And which one has step-by-step instructions? Those are procedures. Good. All right. Well, that one was a little messed up, but you can't win them all. So I suspect that's not a real name. Just at a wild guess. V, I know who that is. That's 6 now. And Jesh, it's got 6, but I don't know exactly who they are. Aha, I know your chat message coming in. Aha, oh, okay, good. I should have known that. Okay, good. All right, so I now have a real name for the Jesus. Good. All right, so, all right, good. And haven't been here for an hour yet, so I think I can keep going. All right, so then there's business continuity. This is business continuity planning, is where you plan to handle disasters, like your employees might get sick, the building might burn down, some company employee might do something horrible and go to prison or something. Things can happen. So you have to have plans of how you are going to deal with this, and the disaster recovery plan is part of this, to deal with disasters like earthquakes and fires and such. All right. So in order to prepare this, you have to perform a business impact analysis where you decide how much harm would it do our business for this particular part of it to be down. Like if the help desk was down for a week, how bad would that be if our billing was down for a week? How about if the website was down for a week? You decide how long you can tolerate each part of your business being down. And then you can decide which parts you have to spend more money to protect and bring up faster, and what parts you can afford to leave them down for a while. So you have a contingency plan, a business impact analysis, then you define controls and contingency strategies, then a contingency plan, and then you have to have exercises and tests and training to prepare people to do your plan. And then you have to have plan maintenance where you update things. It is very common that a disaster happens and you realize that, you know, the documents are out of date, the people have left, and the list of people responsible haven't been updated, and your plan doesn't really do you any good unless you keep it up to date. All right. So you have personnel policies. If you're hiring people, you really ought to be making reasonable effort not to hire people that you know are going to make trouble. So you should be screening them and doing background checks to see if they have criminal records, and you should be making them sign various agreements and enforcing codes of conduct and punishing them if they violate your code of conduct. And that's the issue, conflicts of interest and ethics. These are all things that you should be considering and dealing with. You should have an onboarding process where when new people come on, you train them so they understand what the rules are and make sure they have all the passwords and information they need. And then you have an offboarding process when they leave to make sure they understand their responsibilities and that they aren't taking company data and misusing it and so on. You ought to have an orderly way to bring people in and to send people out. And of course, as part of the exit, you should be canceling all their accounts so they can't log in after they're gone, that sort of thing. Job rotation and separation of duties is common. You have job rotation where people don't get to stay in one job too long. They are rotated to another job. This makes sure that another person looks at it. The point of this is to prevent people from committing fraud. If you work somewhere, you might have some scheme whereby you're stealing the money, and if you get rotated out, then somebody else will come in and that will presumably stop it and perhaps even detect it. This is also the reason companies typically have mandatory vacation. If you have an employee that never takes a vacation, one reason that happens is because, in fact, they're doing something criminal, and that's why they can never leave. And so forcing them to take their vacation and have somebody else substitute for them is a way to detect that. Separation of duties is a common issue where it's not enough to have one person do something. This is too critical. You have to have another person review it before it goes out. Two people have to sign off on it before this all-important thing happens. And companies I was at, this was true of check disbursement. We're a financial company. The main thing we did was take people's money and then send out checks, and they made sure that there were always two people reviewing things before checks went out because that was too important, and so on. All right. This doesn't prevent all fraud, of course, but it means you can't have fraud without two people working together, and that's more rare. The really big scams I knew involved people with conspiracies, a whole group of people who worked together and planned for years, and that is very hard to stop. Anyway, so here's your security concept cycle. You start with, say, assets. Then you consider what your exposures are, the risks that might happen. Then you put in some safeguards. There are threat agents and threats and vulnerabilities and risks, and you just go around a cycle assessing these things. All right, and then there's risk analysis. So assets are the things you're protecting. Threats are bad things that might happen, and vulnerabilities are weaknesses which might cause harm. And so you take threat times vulnerability. So the earthquake risk is the same in Boston and San Francisco. In Boston, earthquakes are rare, but the buildings are not built earthquake safe for that reason. So when they happen, they do more harm. In San Francisco, they're common, but the buildings are built to a higher standard, so it's about the same. So an impact is how bad it will be when the bad thing happens. So it's threat times vulnerability times impact is the total risk, and that's the total amount of dollars you will lose if the bad thing happens. Human life is generally considered an infinite impact. The only company that really plans in terms of losing human life is the military. Most other companies don't feel the luxury of actually having acceptable losses of human life, although in the world of medicine, it's absolutely true. But I think people try to lie about it there because they don't want to admit the truth. But it's absolutely true that medical decisions, you weigh how many humans you're going to kill this way or how many humans you're going to kill that way, and there is no choice of killing zero of them. But they try to avoid admitting that. Anyway, so you often have just a high, low, medium thing here. So if you have risk analysis, so rare things with an insignificant consequence are low risk, but things that have a catastrophic consequence are high risk, you just sort them into categories here. And then, of course, you take the highest risk and focus mostly on preventing that. So you hear some people like to put in this math, which scares people. Often all you can do is a qualitative thing, but occasionally you can take the value of the asset, the exposure factor, which is how much of the asset will be destroyed by the event, and then how much you expect to lose in one event is the multiplication of those. So if you have a building and a fire will damage 10% of the building, then the loss is 10% of the cost of the building. Then you have how often you expect that to happen in a year. and you multiply that, and now you have the total amount of dollars per year that you expect to lose. And these, like I say, are typically only estimates. So that's your total cost of ownership. Your total cost of ownership of something is the cost of maintenance, staff hours, software subscriptions, the cost to purchase it, the cost to replace it when it wears out. And this is where Microsoft likes to talk about this. They say, people say, I could get OpenOffice and Linux for free. They say, yes, you could. And then your staff will spend a whole lot of time not being able to do their job because the product doesn't work very well and it's too confusing and they can't easily find a textbook and a training course, and you can't hire more staff easily to fill them in when they get sick. And you'll find out you actually spend more money in the total cost of ownership than if you just buy our commercial product, which is the standard that everybody knows how to use. That's their argument. And people go both ways on this. Some people like the open source, other people just pay the cost and go with the commercial product. But this is the calculation. What is the total cost of owning this? It's not as simple as how much did I pay to buy it. It's how much does it really cost to use it in the real world. So return on investment is the amount of money you get by investing in something like a safeguard. So you say, I want to make the passwords longer, or buy a firewall, or put an armed guard at the gate. You figure out whether that's really going to save you money. It costs this much to buy that control, and here's how much damage is supposedly prevented. In the world of security, this is almost impossible to do, and that's why security is typically sold by fear. You say, oh, we might get hacked, that would be terrible. Buy this thing. And they say, okay, but they say, can you actually say how many dollars I saved by buying that thing? And the answer is probably not. So your choices are accept a risk, just do nothing. This is what most companies do just because they don't do any risk planning. But once you're grown up, you try only to accept certain risks, then you mitigate it by putting in some kind of control to limit it, or you transfer it by buying insurance or somehow making it somebody else's problem in that regard, or you just avoid it by not doing that activity anymore. So you don't have that risk. You quit doing some portion of your business entirely because you decide it's too risky. So quantitative is the nice risk analysis where you actually get it down to numbers, but experienced people know that numbers are pretty much just guesses anyway. Qualitative is where you just have high, medium, and low. So here's the NIST management framework where you have you categorize your systems, then you select controls, then you implement them, then you assess to see how well they worked. Then you have your monitoring to see how well it's going, and then you redefine. You go around in circle again and again as necessary. It's all pretty much the same loop. You define what you want, you try to achieve it, you see how well you have achieved it, and then you modify your plan to try to achieve it better. All right, so these are the access control types you've seen in every security class from Security Plus and everything else. You have preventive, detective, corrective controls, recovery, deterrent, and compensating controls. So preventive controls prevent a bad thing from happening, like a firewall. Presumably, bad attack comes, the firewall blocks it, it doesn't get in. That's the idea. Detective controls don't prevent anything. They just measure whether it's happened, like a security camera. Corrective controls try to correct damage when something has gotten through a control, like an antivirus that can actually remove a virus before it takes effect. Then you have recovery controls, which try to recover after damage, like backups, and a deterrent control, which tries to scare away attackers without actually being preventive. Like you put up a sign saying there's a dog and hopefully that will scare them away, even though there is in fact no dog. Compensating controls are controls that try to compensate for weaknesses in other controls. So you do things like review server logs to see if people are doing unauthorized things. Even though you had controls to prevent that, you have another layer of defense, a compensating control to catch when that fails. Years ago, I did a project which actually one of my videos got taken down by YouTube and then put up again. I was at DEF CON, and I was that time checking cookie reuse. Many websites would let you steal a cookie and reuse it again later. So I found that my bank, Chase Manhattan, would let you do that with my credit card. To log in my credit card account, copy the cookie, log out, and get back in with the cookie. And I told them, and they totally ignored me. They lied to me. They said, we'll get back to you, and they didn't get back to me, which is usually what happens when I report security problems. And so I made a video hacking into my Chase credit card account with a stolen cookie. And that, tons of people got excited about that. But the point is, it wasn't really that big a deal because you could come back in with the cookie, even though you logged out. But after something like 5 minutes of inactivity, it would log you out anyway. So they had another layer of defense. The cookie couldn't be used for very long. And that's why you have layers of defense and compensating controls. So even if one control is ineffective, the next control might limit the damage. Anyway, so administrative controls are not technical, they're just rules and procedures. like HR rules. You have to obey this or you will punish you. Technical controls are the ones we think of most in technical classes like firewalls and antivirus and such. And then there's physical control, locks, fences, guards, just to stop physical access to things. All these things are important. And whatever you do, you have to do threat modeling to decide what risks to deal with. So there are different ways to model. You can start by the application and figure out what might happen to your application. Most common one I hear about, you start from the asset. Here's what we want to protect. Now let's try and figure out what might attack it and how to block that. So you identify your assets, figure out who might want to attack and what they might do, then figure out what countermeasures you have and what vulnerabilities you still have where your current countermeasures are inadequate, and then decide what further countermeasures are cost effective to add. Microsoft has a categorization of threats: spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, elevation of privilege. There are many others. Just an attempt to enumerate the bad things that people might do so you can make sure you've thought of them all in your planning. So here's various techniques: stride, pasta, trike, and vast, each of which have different desirable features as a threat modeling structure. So your supply chain is one that's been getting a lot of press in the management conferences for the last several years, because people are realizing if you use something like Python, then you use easy install and install a library, you don't know where that library came from. It came from some random guy in a foreign country using a fake name, and it includes more code from other libraries. And they say, wait a minute, how many people's code am I using here, and has that code really been audited, and what country did it come from? Might it come from a country that's hostile to me? And the fact is, you're using hundreds of pieces of software that you didn't write, that you didn't audit, that nobody looked at, that you don't even know where it came from. And the same thing's true of all your hardware. Those chips come from China, the boards come from God knows where. How do you know you can trust that stuff? That's the supply chain risk. So people are now talking about third-party assessment and monitoring and trying to have service-level agreements with all these things. There are now commercial products that will attempt to identify your third-party risk and somehow help you choose more reliable sources of all these things. You could write all your own code, but that's prohibitively expensive. So this is, I think, a current hot area of development of products and services. They're trying to sell you things that they claim deal with this, because there are several spectacular breaches that came through the supply chain. So I got another Kahoot here, 1G, which is here. Aha, got a few more people. I'll give it a few more seconds. Looks like that's it. All right. So, a warning sign, what's that? That's a deterrent, okay? An acceptable use policy. That's administrative, okay? If a risk has a high likelihood and a low impact, what should you do? You generally accept it. This is the classic example of people stealing pens from work or making personal copies on the copy machine. It's usually not even worth the bother to do anything about it. Just let it go on. Anyway. All right, if you have 100 cars worth 50K each and they wreck 1% of them each year, what's the ALE? Okay, that's, you lose 1 car per year, so you lose 50K on average per year. That's how much you are losing. And then if you want to consider something like insurance or something, you would compare it to that cost to decide if it's worth it. All right, a security camera, what's that? It's a technical detective control. It is equipment, and what it does is just measure something. It's not physical because it doesn't actually stand in the way and prevent something like a fence or a gate. All right. How about an electrified fence? That's preventive. There are attackers who will try and decide they really can't get through that. So, all right. Okay, D. Foles, that might be something related to a real name. Guess who is certainly not? I'm guessing that's probably Ed. It's you. Okay, good. All right. And then me at is going to, that's you. Okay. All right. I'll check with you 2 guys later and get the right name there. They're Artem, right? Good. Okay, good. This one I know. All right. All right. All right. So I think that's it. Let me go to my slides and make sure I've hit them all. Nope. What? No, we've been here. Yeah. All right. So that's it for this. Let me see what the schedule says. I think next week you have to turn in your topic or something. Yeah. So next week you should have your topic, and then you can start doing presentations in the following few weeks, and then turn in your paper after that. So you should be thinking about that stuff. Meantime, just keep reading the chapters and doing the quizzes. I'll stick around here for a while if anybody wants to work on hands-on projects in this or any other class. But that's it for tonight. And have a good night. A chat message might be telling you the identity of one of these people or something. How do we turn in topics? Oh, just turn them in to the email address where everything goes, which is just email them to here, cnet125@gmail.com. Good, a very good point. All right, anything else? You could use any security topic you like, even one related to like politics or something. I mean, I don't really care what it is as much as how clearly you present about it. I'm mostly looking for communication skills. It should have something to do with one of the 8 domains, but the CISSP domains are really broad. Physical security, administrative rules, almost anything you would see in a security newspaper is on topic. There's no groups, just individuals. Yeah, just individual. I decided not to use the groups this semester. Okay, any others? All right, I'm going to stop the share. And like I say, I'll stick in the room for anybody who wants help in the room for a while. All right.